Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Ought called Room Inside the World. So I'm not gonna lie, as much as I was really looking forward to this release and it was one of my most anticipated in February, some of the buzz leading up to it had me, well, more concerned than I wanted to be. Cause look, I like Ought a lot for their smart, amazingly well-textured and nervy post-punk that, especially with their record Sun Coming Down in 2015, saw a lot greater refinement in the melodic grooves and the complex transitions and really some great hooks. And for as much as Tim Darcy could sound like he was splitting his David Byrne impression with that of Elias Bender Ronnenfeld of Ice Age, this sort of artistic but deeply felt indie rock, it's an easy sell for me. And before you consider how well they can translate the anxious tension into the sort of instability where you literally cannot predict where it's gonna go next, along with a pretty strong social conscience and coming from Canada nonetheless, hell yeah, I'm on board with this album. But in the rollout for Room Inside the World, I had started hearing buzz that the band had changed labels to merge, and that this album in particular was embracing more new wave and synthesizers and streamlining things even further. And yeah, I was really conflicted about that, mostly as the critical reception seemed a little more reticent. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate Ought looking to refine their internal sense of logic and composition within their songs. The improvisation they used in the past, it's a nice touch, but it can lead to some indulgence, or at the very least mixed rewards. But there is such a thing as over-polish when you look at a band like Ought, where you can lose some of that wild spirit that makes them so distinct and compelling. And considering the mixed reception to Tim Darcy's solo project a year or so back, I wasn't sure if some of that would translate onto this album, but okay. What the hell? What did we get on Room Inside the World? Oh man alive, I really wish I liked this project a lot more than I do, because on some level, I actually get it. Ought choosing to embrace more polished and restrained compositions, as I said before, it could have created some pretty potent results if they tilted into the unstable bombast at their core that made their first two records so starkly memorable with so much personality. Unfortunately, Room Inside the World is the sort of record where I can hear the rationale for every single artistic choice they made, but it seems like the majority of them were a perfect storm of misfires, at least for me. And what's actually kind of alarming is that it's less interesting than that implies. Reminiscent of the early to mid-80s post-punk albums that lost some of their ragged edge and punch, but weren't slick or colorful enough to gain mainstream traction or a cult following. Now, it's not precisely bad. The fundamental core of Ought's musicianship is strong enough to keep me listening, especially their rhythm section, but the spark, it really feels snuffed out, and this record as a whole winds up far less interesting and compelling as a result. It's decent, but it's far from great. And the place where we really have to start is frontman Tim Darcy. And remember how I made comparisons to David Byrne and a certain nervy, nasal presence before on early albums? Well, for some reason, Darcy decided to embrace a more broadly theatrical mode of delivery, dipping into a wonky baritone that had some drawing comparisons to early Nick Cave, but reminded me a lot more of the yodeling tones of Kevin Rowland of Dexy's Midnight Runners, except minus the intensity that made those vocals tolerable. That's what's genuinely alarming about Tim Darcy's delivery here. You can tell that he's trying to modulate for some brand of romantic crooning to match with some of the slicker grooves, and while there are songs like Desire and Brief Shield where he kinda gets close to that, mostly courtesy of production that gives them a little bit more space or multi-tracking, or in the case of Desire, a 70-person backing choir, but for the rest of this, he's just not convincing in this mold at all. It's not a good lane for him. What's worse is that there are snippets on Disgraced in America or Take Everything where there are hints of that more clipped David Byrne-esque delivery comes back, and it's such a better fit for these grooves and style of writing, even with the changes in production and composition. And about that songwriting and lyrics, one of the more anchor points behind what made Ought so compelling for me in the past was how when confronted with soulless social constructs around them, our protagonists, they bucked against them in a rather ingenious way, embracing just enough of the language of that world and system to fit the conforming archetype, but then twisting it ever so slightly to rip the blinders away from everybody else watching, just like what happened to him. A disruption of the system on a song like Beautiful Blue Sky that wasn't just exultant for him, but kind of revelatory. I really like that novel approach. So why Ought thought tilting into disaffected distance on this album would have anywhere close to the same impact is mystifying. Again, I get it. Yet songs like Into the Sea shows the emotional weight pressing them down further, and Disgraced in America highlights not just the walls of ideology that people build up around them, but how the musical act of performing those protest songs are just as systemic, playing to the choir. So why not embrace detachment on songs like Disaffectation or Take Everything like fellow Canadian indie darlings and new pornographers did on Whiteout Conditions last year? Well, for one, the entire arc of Whiteout Conditions is realizing the tremendous danger of walking away and detaching, and for another, it doesn't exactly help Ott get invested in the romantic sentiments that fill up the rest of this album, which also aren't helped by Ott's jagged, scattershot writing style that's less impressionistic and more just kind of obtuse for its own sake. Yes, in capturing the reality of fading affection on desire, that distance works to emphasize the tragedy. That song works. But more straightforward moments of falling in love like These Three Things or Brief Shield, even with the gender flipping there, they fall flat. And the lingering melancholy of Alice, intended as a tribute to the late great jazz pianist Alice Coltrane, it fades into a droning outro that feels like a dark counterpart to How Sun Coming Down, and is showing instead the discomfort of not knowing that direction, where in reality on the last album they didn't care. But then to imply it's because of his openness to experiences, it flies in the face of the existing themes of this album, and a really damp, sour note in which to end things just did not connect. Of course, all this could have been forgivable if the record hit with any sort of consistent dramatic swell or momentum, or took any of the wild melodic shifts that made Sun Coming Down so compelling, and yet it doesn't happen. I'll give the rhythm section all the credit in the world for trying to add some momentum or spark to this album. Take Everything has some of that jittery momentum in that snare line, and Disaffectation nearly gets there as a pastiche of The Cure if it wasn't for that wonky slowdown with some really ugly synthesizer choices. Hell, between those glassy synth gurgles pushed onto These Three Things and the atonal drones on Places Wasted and Disaffectation, I'd say the synth choices are by far the most incongruous parts of the album, but even when you get promising lead guitar lines, there's none of the edge or momentum to really add characters to these tunes or hooks. Find enough foundational melody, sure, but it's not like Ott really cares about nailing a hook in their lyrics, in their structure of these songs, and even if they do, the tempos are too languid and measured to really make them pop for me. Or even on a song like Take Anything that actually does open up for a guitar solo, the tempo and melodic through line doesn't match with the hook at all, and the transitions feel really stiff for some reason. But even then, I wouldn't say the guitar melodies are nearly as developed or interesting as what characterized Sun Coming Down. Even with songs like Desire trying to evoke more ornate bombast where the guitar bombast wasn't the point, you're not getting a song with a melody as potent as Passionate Turn, and certainly not with the same edge that characterized their last two albums. But look, I get that this record is trying to be a little more classy and languid and measured. They're more new wave than post-punk at this point. But in making that artistic pivot, it renders so much of what made Ott interesting in the first place a lot weaker. If not internally, there is some consistency, which I do kind of respect. Again, this is decent. But the melodies are not as catchy or interesting. The content doesn't pack nearly the same punch romantically or otherwise. The vocal delivery gets grating really fast and not in the way the band has intended in the past. And any snippet or groove of wildness just reminds you of a band that used to be a lot more compelling. For me, light 6 out of 10, only kinda hard to recommend here. There's better post-punk that not only doesn't feel so indebted to its influences, that doesn't rise above it, but also can get abstract with its narrative and actually stick the landing. Unfortunately, while it's passable, Room Inside the World, it didn't get there. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe and be more than grateful. Not one of my better reviews, gotta be honest, but hey, this album doesn't give me a lot to say, and it should have been so much better than it is. If you want to buy it though, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you guys. If you're curious, check it out, or you want to tell me how wrong I am, there's your opportunity. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved with supporting this channel or impacting my schedule, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right down there. You want to see the link to my actual schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.